Hello everyone, and welcome to the first Grandpa's House Chapter 2 devlog. For those of you who are new, I'm making a sequel for my horror game Grandpa's House, which was about your murderous grandpa trying to catch you on your games at night. It gained a lot of attention and I decided to make a second chapter. Creating a devlog seems simple enough, just show the progress you made on the game and talk about it. But there isn't a way to show progress on a horror game without spoiling parts. So I'll be sharing the key mechanics and rejected and final aspects of the game. A big problem I wanted to tackle was Grandpa himself. Every character in a 3D world has to be controlled with a rig. A rig is a set of bones that can change their rotation and position. In the first game, Grandpa didn't have a good set of bones, so his rig would cause him to run like this. I tried fixing this on my own, but I should have learned from the first game that I don't know how to rig. So I used Mixamo, a free website from Adobe that rigs your characters for you. And now, Grandpa's looking much better. Grandpa's House wasn't all a one-person project, by the way. It was made with my brother, who voiced Grandpa
Off to bed now.
and created artwork for the game. These artworks are designed to be placed inside a factory, so my brother created these workers and encouraging quotes to boost productivity. My brother also created the artwork for the Grandpa's House Chapter 1 Steam page, so be sure to check that out. Progress has been hard to make mainly because of school, but when I'm in break and when I find free time, I will be working on Grandpa's House. During these couple of months in development, I also created a storyboard to follow to not drift away from the goals and the story of Grandpa's House. So don't worry, I'm not winging it. In this free time during development, I also got to work on lore for the game. I only had a week to work on Grandpa's House Chapter 1 for a competition, but in Chapter 2, I really want to focus on the gameplay time and replayability. I'm going to do this mainly through gameplay and try not to stall the player through dialogue, so there is still going to be a lot of interactable parts in the game. I'm planning to add robots to the factory too. Now they're not going to do too much, and in reality are more of a background character, but I feel that it would give life to the factory and may be good for some parts that may support the lore. Aside from rigging Grandpa, the biggest obstacle I had to get through so far is character movement. In Chapter 1, the player was confined to a bed, which means that there wasn't any movement and all the player could do was look around. However, in this chapter, we would like the player to navigate the factory. So I added these core mechanics. First, I added a camera bob so the player will feel lifelike and real. Next, I added the ability to walk, sprint, crouch, jump, and interact. I was having issues getting the player in tight spaces, so I had to add a height checker function that checks if the player is tall enough to stand up. If he is, then he'll prop himself up and keep moving. If he isn't, he'll stay crouched and not be able to jump. In this walking function, I set it up so when the player sprints, he will travel almost 2 times faster than his original speed. But if the player is crouching and sprinting, he won't travel as fast. The crouch function was annoying to make, which is why I had ChatGPT do it for me. But the basics of it is, if the player is crouching, drop his camera at almost half his body height, but also drop his body to half his height. So you're left with this awkward, half colliding, half not colliding character. Jumping was simple to make, just added bounce force. Creating an interactable mouse was a lengthy process. I started with ChatGPT, where I got a script that casts a raycast or a line from my crosshair forward. This line will check for any blocking objects and tell me their name. This name was then sent as selected object to my other scripts in the game. The scripts would then check if they have code for that object. So if I interact with a cube named Jingle, the scripts will search for an if statement asking if I interacted with Jingle. Once it recognizes that Jingle was interacted with, I can perform my function and finally make it do tasks. I'm pretty happy with how these mechanics came out, and so did Grandpa's new rig. I had this plan for a room that was scrapped called the Nature Dome. The Nature Dome was essentially this giant dome that the player was dropped into. And when I mean giant, I mean huge, like almost 200 times the player's size. It had this huge viewing box where Grandpa would watch from. I came up with this idea as a place where Grandpa took his victims to unalive them, but I forgot to take into account how awkward this room looked with the rest of the factory. No normal factories will have a colossal dome compared to their employees just poking out. I tried convincing myself that, oh well, maybe Grandpa built it. But even that sounded ridiculous, because there was already a lot of stains in the factory, and knowing Grandpa how we knew him in the first game, he doesn't need a special place to unalive someone. So this concept of the nature dome was abandoned, but not before making a permanent mark on the game files. I had fully 3D modeled it, which is now gone, but the file name is still there. The room I came up with to replace the nature dome still keeps its name, and I just started calling it the nature dome in all the code too, because why not? Arguably the most important aspect of any horror game is their soundtrack and sound effects. Sound is something I decided to add about midway through chapter 1. And I think it came out great, but with chapter 2, I'm going to save sound design for the end. Sound isn't my specialty, but this doesn't mean I won't be able to properly sync, sound, and dialogue. I'm still having voice lines recorded, and my very own brother is the voice actor for Grandpa. The main objective of the first chapter and the second chapter will be different, however. In popular games like Poppy's Playtime and FNAF, their objectives were leave the factory and survive the animatronics. But in Grandpa's house, I'm shifting from hide your games to survive Grandpa. I think these two are still related because you had to hide your games in order to survive Grandpa. But the biggest difference is that in chapter 2, it's not about being alert, it's about staying alive. And with all that being said, that's it for this video. I know this first devlog wasn't too exciting because the game doesn't have a lot of free space that if I show won't spoil the story. But I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing, leaving a like on the video, and download Grandpa's House Chapter 1 on Steam. And I'll see you in the next devlog.